It began on the edge of autumn, when the air turned sharp and the light started to fall a little differently on the trees. Rachel had always noticed the shift in seasons more keenly than most. She said it felt like the world exhaled, like everything was holding its breath for the dark half of the year. That was something she shared only with her twin sister, Emily. They had always been close. Close in the way that only identical twins can be, not just in appearance, but in thoughts, in memories, in the small rituals they developed growing up that no one else understood. Rachel and Emily lived separately now. Rachel had moved to the city a few years ago after getting a job at a mid-sized marketing firm. Emily stayed in their hometown, a smaller place surrounded by dense forests and winding back roads. Emily had always liked the quiet, the familiar. She worked at the local library and lived in the house their grandmother had left them. The two sisters still spoke often, texts, calls, the occasional weekend visit, but life had made its slow, inevitable wedge. Rachel thought about Emily more than she reached out. She made mental notes to call her later and forgot. She assumed there would always be time.
The last time they spoke was a Thursday. Rachel had been walking back from work, half listening as Emily talked about something strange she'd found in one of the old library archives. A journal with no name, entries that didn't make sense. The handwriting, Emily said, looked familiar. Rachel barely paid attention. She was distracted, thinking about dinner, the man she'd just started seeing, her phone buzzing with a text from her boss. She'd said she'd call Emily back that weekend. She didn't. 2 days later, Rachel got the call. Emily was missing. The police were vague at first. There was no sign of forced entry at the house. Her car was still in the driveway, her purse, keys, wallet, all untouched. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. A half-finished cup of tea had gone cold beside it. Nothing was broken, nothing was stolen. She was just gone. Rachel went back home immediately. The drive felt longer than usual, the trees on either side of the road blurring into a deep, unending wall of color. When she arrived at Emily's house, something felt wrong. It wasn't just the absence, it was the silence. The place felt hollow, as if the house itself was pretending not to breathe. Inside, everything looked normal. The books on the shelf were where they always had been. The blanket on the couch was folded in the same neat triangle. Emily's shoes were by the door. Rachel wandered from room to room, calling her sister's name, though she knew there would be no answer. She stayed in that house for the next few days, barely sleeping. Police came and went. They asked the same questions over and over. Had Emily been depressed? Was there anyone who would want to hurt her? Did she ever talk about leaving, running away? The answers were always no. Emily had routines. Emily had no enemies. Emily was happy, at least as far as anyone could tell. Rachel tried to stay strong, but it was a brittle kind of strength. At night, when the house creaked and groaned with the cold, she imagined footsteps in the hall. She would wake in the early hours to the sound of something shifting downstairs, only to find nothing out of place. The nights stretched long and strange, the air in the house thick with something unspoken. The police found nothing. No fingerprints, no signs of struggle. The woods behind the house were searched extensively, but yielded no trace. Flyers were posted. Rachel went to local stores and gas stations with Emily's photo, her voice growing hoarse from the repetition. She answered calls from strangers claiming they'd seen someone who looked like her, but each lead ended in disappointment. Time passed. Weeks turned into months. People stopped asking. The investigation quieted down, but Rachel couldn't let go. She stayed longer than she should have, slowly letting her job fall to the wayside. Relationships grow cold. The city started to feel like a distant memory. Her life began to orbit around one fixed point: finding her sister. The dreams started in November. At first, they were fragments. Emily standing at the foot of her bed, pale and silent. Emily walking into the woods, her back to Rachel. Emily reaching out, her mouth open as if to speak, but no sound coming out. Rachel would wake with a start, heart hammering. The shape of her sister's face burned into her vision. She tried not to read into them. She told herself it was grief. The mind plays tricks. But some part of her was beginning to question what she thought she knew. One night, she dreamed of the basement. The house had an old cellar, narrow steps leading into a low-ceilinged space with stone walls and a dirt floor. They used to play down there as kids, even though it always felt damp and cold, like it belonged to a different world. In the dream, Rachel stood at the top of the stairs, looking down. Emily was there, standing in the middle of the room, her head tilted back. The light bulb overhead flickered. Emily opened her mouth again, but instead of words, a strange sound came out, a rasping, wet noise like something breathing underwater. Rachel woke, gasping. The sheets twisted around her legs, drenched in sweat. She didn't go into the basement that day or the next. But something began to change after that. She started noticing things. Subtle, almost imperceptible. The front door unlocked when she was sure she'd locked it. A book on the table moved an inch to the left. The shower running when she hadn't turned it on. And sometimes, just as she was drifting off to sleep, the sound of footsteps overhead, slow, deliberate. She started to wonder if she was losing her mind. The isolation, the grief, the months spent in limbo, it could do things to people. But the dreams continued, and with them came a growing certainty that Emily was trying to tell her something. Rachel began to keep a journal, writing down every dream, every strange occurrence. She reread old texts, old letters, searching for hidden meanings. She went through Emily's notebooks, her journals, the pages filled with neat, looping handwriting. One in particular caught her eye, the one Emily had mentioned in that last call. It was tucked away at the back of a dusty shelf, bound in cracked leather, the pages brittle and stained. Most of it made no sense. The writing was disjointed, fragmented. Some entries were crossed out violently, others simply ended mid-sentence. One phrase repeated throughout the book, scrawled in the margins and between lines: "She watches from underneath." Rachel didn't know what it meant, but the words made her skin crawl. There was a drawing on the last page, a rough sketch of a face, partially obscured by long strands of hair. The eyes were wrong, too large, too dark, and below it, in jagged handwriting, "You're not looking in the right place." That night, Rachel stood at the top of the basement stairs, her hand on the light switch. She hesitated. Then she turned the light on and descended. The bulb flickered overhead as she stepped onto the cold floor. The air smelled of earth and mold. Her footsteps echoed softly. The basement was empty, just the old shelves, the water heater, boxes of forgotten things. But something felt off. She could feel it in her bones, a kind of tension in the air, like a held breath. She walked to the far wall, running her fingers over the stone. Something caught her eye, an irregularity in the mortar. She pressed against it. The stone shifted slightly. Behind the wall was a crawl space, barely large enough to fit a person. Rachel pulled a flashlight from the shelf and shone it inside. The beam caught on something metallic. She reached in and pulled out a small tin box. Inside were photographs, old and yellowed, most of them showing the house in various stages of construction. One photo showed a group of people standing in the yard. Builders, maybe. But one face stood out. A woman, slightly apart from the others. Her eyes were entirely black. It wasn't a trick of the light. Rachel checked the back of the photo. No names, no dates. There was something else in the box, a folded piece of paper, a map, hand-drawn, showing the layout of the house. But there was an addition, a second room beneath the basement, not marked on any official plans. Rachel spent the next day searching for any sign of that hidden room. She tapped along the floor, listening for hollow spots. She measured distances, compared them to the map. Eventually, she found it, a small square of earth that sounded different when she knocked on it. She started to dig. The soil was dense and wet, clinging to her hands like something alive. She dug for hours, ignoring the cold, the ache in her arms. Eventually, her fingers hit wood. She cleared away more dirt until she uncovered a trapdoor, old and rotting. The handle rusted through. She opened it. The air that rushed out was wrong, stale, thick, almost sweet. She gagged. Below there was a narrow tunnel, just wide enough to crawl through. She hesitated only a moment before climbing in, flashlight clenched in her fist. The tunnel stretched deeper than it should have, far beyond the boundaries of the house. The walls were packed earth, the ceiling low. She crawled for what felt like forever, her knees aching, her breath loud in her ears. Just as she was about to turn back, the tunnel widened into a small chamber. At the center of the room was a chair, and on it something sat, or what remained of something. Rachel screamed. She scrambled backward, out of the tunnel, out of the basement, slamming the trapdoor shut behind her. She didn't sleep that night. She didn't move from the couch. She just sat there, staring at the wall, her hands shaking. She called the police the next morning, but when they searched the basement, there was no tunnel, no trapdoor, just solid earth. Rachel insisted. She begged them to look again. They humored her for a while, then began to exchange looks she didn't like. A social worker came by the next day. They suggested stress, trauma, the need for rest. Rachel barely listened. She knew what she saw, and somewhere deep down, she began to believe that Emily wasn't just missing. She was waiting for someone to find her, or to take her place. Rachel didn't leave the house after that. She couldn't. Something had changed. She didn't trust what she'd seen, or rather, she didn't trust that anyone else would believe her. The days bled into each other. She ate little, slept even less. She spent her time watching the walls, listening for sounds no one else could hear. She thought often about the tunnel, the room, the thing on the chair, but whenever she tried to recall its face, her memory recoiled. It blurred like smeared paint, a wet canvas dragged by trembling fingers. Then one morning in early January, Rachel woke to the sound of knocking. She sat up slowly. The house was still wrapped in dawn shadows. Her breath fogged in the cold air. The knocking came again, louder this time, not from the front door, from the back. She hesitated, every muscle tense, then crossed the kitchen in bare feet. She unlocked the back door and opened it slowly, heart hammering. Emily stood on the porch. Rachel froze. For a moment, neither of them moved. The cold bit at her skin, but she barely noticed. Emily was there, pale, shivering slightly in a long gray coat. Her hair was tangled, longer than it had been before. Her eyes looked dull, sunken with exhaustion. She didn't speak. Rachel reached out and pulled her sister into an embrace. Emily was cold, too cold, but she didn't pull away. Rachel wrapped her arms tighter, blinking back tears. For the first time in months, she let herself breathe. Emily was home. The police were called. Questions were asked. But Emily didn't have answers, not real ones. She remembered little, she said. Flashes, a long road, trees, darkness, sometimes water, but no clear sense of where she'd been. The doctors said trauma, dissociation. Her body bore no signs of major injury, just bruises, malnourishment, dehydration. She was kept for a few days at the hospital, then released. Rachel brought her back to the house, determined not to let her out of sight again. For a while, everything was a blur of relief. Rachel cooked, cleaned, hovered. Emily barely spoke, but that wasn't unusual. She'd always been quiet. Rachel told herself she needed time, healing, patience. But there was something underneath the surface, a dissonance, a wrong note. It began with the small things. Emily didn't seem to recognize the layout of the house. She turned the wrong way in the hallway. She reached for light switches that didn't exist. She couldn't remember where the cups were kept or how to operate the old radio they used to play records on as kids. At first, Rachel attributed it to stress. She'd been through something horrible, but it kept happening. One night, Rachel found her sister standing in the middle of the living room, just staring at the wall. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. When Rachel called her name, Emily turned too slowly, as if confused. Her eyes looked darker, like something had been drained out of them. Then came the nights. Rachel would wake to the sound of creaking floorboards, footsteps just outside her door. Once, she opened her eyes to find Emily standing at the foot of a bed, unmoving, watching. She asked her what she was doing. Emily said she'd gotten lost on the way back to her own room. Rachel didn't sleep well after that. She started writing again, recording the oddities like she had before. She compared old photos to her sister now, obsessing over details. Was her smile the same? The curve of her fingers? The way she blinked? She found herself doubting everything. At one point, she held up a photo from a year ago and stared at it for hours, comparing it to the woman sitting across from her at breakfast. Emily looked like Emily, but something was missing. Then she found the journal. It had been shoved in the back of Emily's closet, wrapped in a scarf. The handwriting was frantic, inconsistent. The entries started months before she disappeared. They were full of paranoia, mentions of a woman in the woods, a shape she kept seeing in mirrors, dreams that followed her into the day. One sentence was circled over and over. "She says I'm the hollow one." Rachel's skin prickled as she read further. One page was soaked through. The ink bloomed into unreadable blotches. But the last entry was legible. "I don't think it's a dream. I think she's already here." Rachel closed the journal and locked it in her bag. She didn't mention it to Emily. The next day, Rachel woke to the sound of humming, a soft, tuneless melody drifting through the house. It was familiar. something their mother used to hum when they were small, but it was distorted, just off-key enough to be unsettling. She followed the sound to the bathroom. Emily was standing in front of the mirror. The light was off. She was humming to her reflection, swaying slightly, her fingers twitching at her sides. Rachel watched for a moment, unsure if she should interrupt. Then she saw it. Emily's reflection was not moving in sync. It tilted its head just a second too late. It blinked when Emily did not. Rachel gasped. Emily turned, her expression blank. The humming stopped. Rachel said nothing. She backed out of the doorway, heart pounding. She told herself she'd imagined it. A trick of light, fatigue, anything but what she thought it might be. That night, she left the bathroom light on. She didn't sleep. Over the next week, things escalated. Emily became increasingly erratic. She would vanish for hours, then reappear with no explanation. Rachel once found her crouched in the yard at midnight, her hands buried in the frost-covered soil. When asked what she was doing, she simply smiled and said, "Feeding her." Another time, Rachel caught her talking to herself in the basement, speaking in a low, guttural tone Rachel had never heard before. When confronted, Emily claimed she'd been reciting a poem. Rachel began locking her bedroom door at night. She went into town one afternoon, desperate for answers. She visited the library where Emily used to work. Most of the staff were new. The older librarian, Mrs. Whitmore, remembered Emily well. When Rachel asked about the journal Emily had found, Mrs. Whitmore hesitated. She was different those last few weeks, she said, obsessed with that old journal. Said it belonged to someone who lived in your house long ago. A woman named Marion Rowe, supposedly a recluse. People said she talked to shadows. They found her dead in the woods. No one ever figured out what she was doing out there. Rachel asked to see any documents related to her. Newspaper clippings, obituaries, anything. There was nothing official, just whispers, myths. Some folks say she never really left, Mrs. Whitmore added quietly, that she watches the ones who come into her home. Rachel went back to the house with shaking hands. That night, she dreamed of the tunnel again. This time, Emily was inside it, crawling. But there was something ahead of her, a mirror, and in the mirror, a face that was not hers. Rachel woke screaming. She checked Emily's room. It was empty. Panic surged. She searched the house, calling her name, but found nothing. Then she noticed the basement door was ajar. She descended slowly, flashlight in hand. The air felt heavy, as if the walls were pressing inward. At the base of the stairs, she stopped. Emily was there, but she wasn't alone. She was standing in the middle of the room, speaking to the wall. A shape was pressed into the shadows, indistinct, female, unmoving. Rachel stepped back, her breath caught in her throat. Then Emily turned. "Why are you spying on me?" she asked, her voice calm, level. Rachel couldn't answer. Her mind reeled. She ran back upstairs and locked the door behind her. The next morning, Emily acted as though nothing had happened. She made breakfast. She laughed at something on TV. She asked if Rachel wanted to go for a walk. Rachel declined. Instead, she went to the old town hall archives. She needed proof, something solid. She found the blueprints of the house, the original ones from decades ago. There it was, the cellar, the foundation, and a note scribbled in the margin. Sub-level access, sealed 1963. She took the plans home. That night, Rachel waited until Emily was asleep, at least she hoped she was, and returned to the basement. She found the place where she'd uncovered the tunnel. The dirt was undisturbed now, but she dug again. Her fingers blistered, her nails cracked. Eventually, the trapdoor emerged once more, exactly as before. She opened it. This time, she brought rope, a better flashlight, and her phone. She descended into the darkness, each breath shallow, each movement cautious. The tunnel was still there, still impossibly long. She crawled. Eventually, she reached the chamber. It was the same, and yet something had changed. The chair was empty, but around it were marks in the dirt, handprints, scratches, dragging lines that led deeper into a second passage she hadn't seen before. She followed. The tunnel narrowed. The air grew colder. She smelled rot, wet stone. Then she emerged into a larger space, circular, with walls carved into strange symbols. At the center was a pit. Rachel approached, peered inside. It was deep, too deep, and something was moving far below. She aimed her flashlight downward. The beam barely reached the bottom. And then, from the shadows, something looked back. A face, pale, filthy, eyes wide with terror. It was Emily. She was alive, buried, starved, clawing at the earth. Rachel screamed. Then something grabbed her from behind, strong, cold hands pulling her back, dragging her away from the pit. She kicked, thrashed, twisted her head. The other Emily was there, grinning. "Shh," she whispered. Rachel was thrown backward into the tunnel. She hit her head. The light went out. Darkness swallowed her. She awoke in the basement, the trapdoor sealed, the dirt smoothed over as if nothing had been disturbed. Her hands were muddy. Her throat ached from screaming. The other Emily was waiting at the top of the stairs. "Bad dream?" she asked. Rachel didn't answer. She knew now. The thing in her house wasn't her sister, and her real sister was still down there in the dark, waiting to be found. The days that followed blurred into something unreal, a waking nightmare stitched together with too much silence and the growing certainty that the person Rachel lived with was not human. Not anymore. She tried to act normal, to play along, to pretend she hadn't seen the thing in the pit. But the cracks were forming fast. The thing that wore Emily's face watched her constantly now. Its eyes didn't blink enough. It smiled too often. It started finishing her sentences in a way Emily never used to, mirroring her speech patterns, her mannerisms, as if it were learning, adapting. It left no room for escape. Every time Rachel turned to go upstairs, downstairs to the door, the thing was suddenly behind her or ahead, blocking the way with some excuse or empty comment that rang too perfectly rehearsed. Rachel stopped sleeping. She kept a knife under her pillow. She couldn't look in mirrors anymore. She was afraid of what she might see. Her thoughts fractured. Time became elastic. Daylight barely helped. The thing seemed most at ease during the day. At night, it didn't even pretend to sleep. She heard it walking the halls, dragging its nails along the walls, breathing through the vents. Sometimes it whispered things in the dark, soft and low like wind through leaves, words she couldn't understand, but which left a taste in her mouth like ash and copper. Then came the smell. It started faint, like damp earth and rotting leaves, but it grew stronger every day. It clung to her clothes, her hair, her skin, the smell of the grave. She bleached the floors, she scrubbed the walls. Nothing helped. One morning, Rachel found small clumps of dirt on the kitchen floor, tiny handprints smeared across the refrigerator, scratches on the inside of the window panes. The thing didn't even acknowledge them. That night, she heard knocking from under the floor. Not footsteps, knocking. 4 short raps, a pause, 3 more. The rhythm repeated. Rachel crouched on the floor, ear pressed to the cold wood, listening. It wasn't the first time she'd heard it, but it was the loudest. Real, measured, human. She dug again. She waited until the thing went for a walk. A new habit it had picked up, a daily ritual it claimed was helping it feel normal again. Rachel knew it used that time to do something else. She could feel it in her bones. She watched it go down the path, heading toward the woods, and she ran to the basement. This time, she used a crowbar. She worked fast, hands blistered and bleeding, dirt flying. The wood of the trapdoor finally cracked. She heaved it open, shining her flashlight down into the pit. She didn't hesitate. She climbed. The tunnel greeted her like an old memory. This time, she moved fast, crawling through the suffocating dark, whispering her sister's name like a prayer. The passage widened into the chamber. The chair was still empty. She found the second tunnel again. The air turned fetid. The symbols on the wall pulsed faintly, alive somehow, like they were carved in veins instead of stone. She ignored them. She didn't look back. The pit waited. Rachel reached it and called down. This time, the face appeared instantly, gaunt, wild-eyed, barely human. But it was her, the real Emily. Rachel lowered the rope she'd brought. She tied it around a support stone and fed it down carefully, whispering words of comfort, trying to stay calm, even as her own hands trembled uncontrollably. The rope jerked once, then again. Slowly, painfully, the figure began to rise. When her sister finally reached the edge, Rachel fell to her knees and pulled her up the last stretch. Emily collapsed into her arms, fragile, broken, skin like wax and bone. She reeked of death, but her eyes were alive. Rachel held her sister and sobbed. They didn't have long. Rachel slung Emily's arm around her shoulders and half carried, half dragged her back through the tunnel. Every few feet, she had to stop to let her breathe. Her sister was whispering something over and over. Rachel leaned in close. "She wants you. She always wanted you. I was just the echo." Rachel didn't understand. She didn't want to. When they finally reached the basement again, it was dark outside, and the thing was waiting. It stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the dim hallway light, its face tilted in a mockery of curiosity. "Oh," it said, "you've been busy." Rachel shoved Emily behind her. The thing descended slowly, one step at a time, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. As it neared, its features flickered, blurring for just a moment. Its skin rippling, jaw distending slightly, eyes stretching into something too large for a human skull. But then it was Emily again, perfect, smiling. Rachel backed toward the tunnel. The thing cocked its head. "You shouldn't have done that," it said. Then it lunged. Rachel grabbed the crowbar and swung. It struck the thing's shoulder with a sickening crunch. It stumbled, but didn't scream. Instead, it laughed, a dry, hollow sound that came from too many throats. Rachel struck again and again. The third blow sent it crashing into the dirt floor. She turned, grabbed her sister, and they fled into the tunnel. The walls seemed closer now, the air more alive. The symbols glowed red. Emily sobbed against her. Rachel didn't look back, not even when the laughter started again, echoing behind them, growing louder, higher pitched, almost joyful. The thing was following. They reached the pit chamber. Rachel didn't know what to do next. They couldn't go back. They couldn't outrun it. Emily slumped against the wall, wheezing. "She's not whole," Emily whispered. "You broke her reflection. She's bleeding." Rachel turned. The thing appeared in the tunnel's mouth, no longer pretending. Its face was a melted canvas of stolen features, shifting in and out of Emily's likeness. Beneath it, something else stared out. Black eyes, a mouth too wide, skin split and stitched in impossible directions. It crawled on all fours, backward, spider-like. Rachel backed away. Emily pulled something from her clothes, a shard of mirror crusted with old blood. "She needs the mirror," she said. "It's her anchor. Break it." Rachel didn't ask how she knew. She grabbed the shard. The thing screamed. It charged. Rachel raised the glass and the thing struck it, face first. There was a sound like shattering bone, glass and air itself tearing open. Light poured out of the shard, bright, white, searing, and the thing convulsed. Its limbs spasmed. Its skin peeled back, revealing layers of something older, something insectile and bone-white beneath. Then it began to collapse, folding inward, imploding. It shrieked once more, a high, keening wail of loss and rage and desperation, then vanished into the pit with a rush of air and a smell of burned leaves. Silence fell. Rachel collapsed beside her sister, both of them panting, shaking. The walls of the chamber pulsed once, then stilled. The glow faded. They stayed there until the flashlight began to flicker. Eventually, they climbed back up. The house was cold, quiet. It felt dead. They left that night. Rachel didn't lock the door. She didn't look back. Emily spent weeks in the hospital. She barely spoke, but she was alive. She slowly began to eat again. Sleep, remember? Rachel stayed with her. Neither of them went near a mirror for a long time. They didn't tell the doctors the truth. Who would believe them? They said Emily had been abducted, that she'd escaped. No one questioned it too hard. They moved to another state, a small apartment, high floor, no basement. But the past doesn't stay buried forever. One night, months later, Rachel found Emily standing in the hallway again, staring at the mirror. The lights were off. She was humming. Rachel stepped forward slowly. "Em?" Emily didn't move. Rachel touched her shoulder. Emily turned. Her eyes were full of tears. "She's not gone," she whispered. "Just waiting." Rachel looked into the mirror, and behind their reflection, in the space where the shadows gathered, something smiled. Then the mirror cracked.